Kind introduction and welcome to all friends of freedom and responsibility throughout the world, and especially here in Japan. I'm coming to you live from Tokyo. Since this past August, I've spent 40 days on the ground here in Japan and Taiwan, conducting research to open an Asian bureau for the Washington Times. My friends, it was in 1982, 40 years ago, at the height of the Cold War, when Washington had only one daily newspaper, that our founders, the late Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his beloved wife, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, stepped forward with a team of top American media professionals to launch the Washington Times. Now highly respected throughout the world, the Washington Times is a voice for freedom, family, and faith. We thank you, Mother Moon, for your foresight, your courage, your love of humanity. Thank you so much. This second Conference of Hope highlights freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. The lineup of speakers here today has been outstanding. These experts that represent a new front line in the modern-day clash of worldviews, one that supports the existence of God and one that denies the essential role of faith and spirituality in our lives. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was tragically assassinated on July 8th. Since then, regarding media coverage of the Family Federation in Japan, can anyone say that more than 20,000 media reports these past months have been impartial or respectful about this decades-old pro-freedom, non-violent, family-oriented public service religious organization? Not at all. I've seen it. I've witnessed it here. The dominant media in Japan has created a witch hunt environment based on a false narrative. I sincerely appeal to the citizens and the great people of Japan to be discerning in your consumption of biased media. Journalists, editors, publishers, fellow professionals in the media, we should be wise enough not to let themselves be used to spread sensationalism or untruths. Throughout the world, there's now a growing network of concerned citizens, leaders, and institutions who are realizing that Japan's news media is largely driving the social and political lynching of this global religious community. We call upon righteous people throughout the world, raise your voices to Japan's national leaders in support of fairness, accuracy, and human rights. As chairman of the Washington Times and a board member of the Washington Times Foundation, I'm proud to stand with the countless others for the highest ethics in journalism. These include media reporting that is truthful, impartial, fair, and accountable to the public. My friends, it's now an honor to introduce someone who understands media and its influence for good, and he's also witnessed how media can be used to create harm. Mr. Humphrey is an award-winning author and foreign correspondent whose assignments with the BBC have taken him all over the world to cover various crises. He's had postings throughout Asia in Colombo, Delhi, Manila, Hong Kong, and Beijing, where he opened the first BBC television bureau. He's a best-selling author of future history political series, including Dragon Strike, Dragon Fire, and the Third World War, based on the political and military scenarios involving China and the Indo-Pacific now. His latest nonfiction book is Asian Waters, the struggle over Indo-Pacific and the challenge to America. Humphrey is coming to us live from London today. Humphrey, my friend, we welcome you to address this global and distinguished audience, sir. Let's welcome Humphrey Hawksley.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion. It's a complex issue that involves individual human suffering and the broadest of geopolitics impacting the global balance of power. Now, for any newspaper editor, the assassination of a charismatic national figure by a lone individual is a compelling story. add to that the harboring of a long ago grievance about a politically connected religious organization, and you have a cocktail of intrigue that sells newspaper and hikes ratings. But underneath lies a tapestry of stories which the media has so far barely brushed. They will, I hope, because it is important and it is their job. How is it, we must ask, that the needle of interest has so seamlessly shifted from the flawed gunman who killed Shinzo Abe to the Unification Church, which he blamed for taking donations that his mother could not afford decades ago? An examination of the Japanese press coverage is telling on this. A survey of some 5,000 stories carried out by a highly experienced media company shows that the first month's reporting focused on that trouble between the church and the killer's family. The story was placed mainly in what in Japan are known as the social pages, as opposed to the political ones. In August, that emphasis shifted to the relationship between the church and the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Thus, it became a political story, and in the second week of August, the cabinet reshuffle began. Those moved out were accused of using the Unification Church to campaign on their behalf. Now, let's linger with that line for a moment. An upheaval within the cabinet of one of Asia's very few fully developed democracies and a staunch American ally had been caused by politicians allowing a religious organization to help with their campaigning. Yes, there's also the controversy of spiritual sales, but the Roman and Anglican churches are far from squeaky clean. And can we imagine in Latin America, for example, such an accusation taking hold if a member of the Catholic Church campaigned on a politician's behalf? Or in the American heartlands, whether red or blue, could community churches really stay completely out of the local political fray? No, they could not. So, why has it become such a hot potato in Japan, and what elements need to be more closely questioned by the press? The analysis of 4,238 stories from August through to November across the mainstream media, Yomiuri, Sankei, Asahi, Mainichi, and Nihon Keizai, which is the Nikkei, found that not one gave a positive angle on the Unification Church. The story was fueled by television reporting and interviews with those hostile to the church, some of whom had links to the Japanese Communist Party. That left-right rivalry, which is becoming more prominent again in national and international affairs. Yes, there is evidence of reporting bias, but in journalism, a tsunami or prairie fire reporting is not uncommon. Recently, here in Britain, the coverage of the death of the late Queen Elizabeth II carried barely a murmur from those who wanted to abolish the monarchy or anyone who had a bad word to say about it. With more impact, there was lack of critical questioning on the invasion of Iraq. It had no weapons of mass destruction, the ostensible reason for overthrowing Saddam Hussein. That led to war and unrest that shook the Middle East, costing so many lives and failing to bring stability. Which is why critical questioning is so necessary with what is unfolding in Japan. Now, I don't have the answers. I don't know exactly what's happening, but after many decades of reporting from around the world, I do have the questions. Who is ultimately benefiting? What does Shinzo Abe represent? What is the Unification Church exactly, and how does it operate? Let me start with that last question. I've known the church and many of its associated organizations for more than a quarter of a century. Back in the mid-1990s, when I was the BBC bureau chief in Beijing, it helped me get into North Korea with enviable access to places and officials normally denied to the media. At that time, the church was a pivotal player in negotiations to prevent a flare-up or full-scale conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and the framework agreement that emerged was in no small part due to the work of the late Antonio Betancourt and his colleagues in the Unification Church. I did know about its views. The Church makes no secret that its political heart is embedded in want of a better phrase, conservative values, and its connections run to the very top of the Republican leadership in the United States, as seen by some of the prominent figures taking part in this discussion. So, what about Shinzo Abe? He was the mastermind of Japan's new robust security and foreign policy, pushing for changes to the pacifist constitution. In the past few hours, the Japanese government has underpinned Abe's vision by announcing a security strategy that ramps up the defense budget and describes China as an unprecedented strategic challenge to ensuring the peace in Japan and the international community. Earlier, it had announced it would be buying offensive Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States and building a new fighter aircraft with Britain and Italy. The campaign against the Unification Church has undoubtedly weakened elements of the Japanese government. Shinzo Abe, the founder of the current strategic vision, is dead. Many voices opposed to what that vision represents come from what is broadly known as the left. There's that left-right rivalry again. In journalistic slang, we call this a story with many feet. The Unification Church is just one. It is time that that needle of interest examined other strands of this story, which is essentially about the battle for the ideological heart of Japan, the Indo-Pacific's most successful democracy, caught in the crosshairs of change. Thank you very much.